Welcome back to the In the Clinic podcast with Rob, where we are looking to unravel your health, your fitness, your injuries, your longevity, your vitality. We're looking to add to wellness in your life. So if you've come across this video and you're looking to get more out of your health, wellness, fitness, injury prevention, vitality in life, this is the podcast for you. So specifically, we're getting in today for our podcast, insulin resistance, why that matters, why that is everything with your health right now, especially in our country, in America, what we're trying to do as far as longevity to prevent all of our secondary lifestyle diseases. This is the podcast you're going to want to listen to. You're going to want to watch if you're watching on YouTube, because this is where we break down why we're getting a lot of our secondary diseases. So stay tuned for that. A couple updates for the clinic and for just in general. We've got going on right now a lot of softball going on outside of the office. We've got a lot of baseball going on. I know that Josh is coaching some softball and baseball. Myself, I'm coaching a little league baseball team. My daughter and Jill's daughter are both playing for the varsity softball team, and man, they're just doing great. They're doing great. I mean, Jill's daughter's, I think, hit maybe 3 home runs all the year already. She's their leadoff hitter, and she's hitting bombs, which is awesome. And, you know, she's the catcher. My daughter's the pitcher, so they've been a great duo together. Morgan is a fiery individual that holds people accountable and keeps people going in the right direction. And my daughter's been pitching for years and has just come into her own as far as being able to command the strike zone, pitching to get outs as well as strikeouts. And overall with the team, they just got this unrelenting will to win. And it seems so weird. I mean, what does will to win even mean? But they've had 4 or 5 games where they've been down in the final inning, or they're down by 5 runs in the last couple innings, and they find a way to keep chipping back and winning. And so last week they're playing Lakeside, and they're down in the 7th inning, the last inning. It's the bottom of the 7th with 2 outs, and they're down by 5 runs. And they come back and win. They come back and win with multiple hits as a team collective effort. They push it into overtime. Overtime turns into my daughter striking out 5 out of 6 in the final 2 innings. And she ends up getting the game-winning bunt. So they had bases loaded, or they had bases on a second and third, I believe. And she puts down a bunt, and they can't get her out at first. And they end up scoring the run. And so all in all, it's been a magical ride to see this team believe in themselves. All the years of Tribe, which is club softball, summer softball, that my wife and I coached to keep them going. The years of junior high softball, even varsity softball where we coached them for a while. And to just see them come together has been magic. So a lot of good things are happening with the softball season. You know, the baseball season with the Kiwanis baseball, that's a whole different deal. You know, we've got a brand new team. We've got a lot of new players, and, you know, we're currently 1-1 on the season, just barely lost in the final inning by 1 run on the last game. But it's really interesting to go from coaching at the varsity level and then coming back down to the 12, 11-year-old level. And the layers of paint, as my dad calls it, has been really interesting to see how many layers of paint it takes to get that masterpiece to the varsity level. So right now, my son's team, they're working on it. They're working on laying the layers of paint. We're really isolating our pitching and catching, doing well. And our next phase is to really get stronger on our defensive end, but also start advancing with our hitting. So we only scored 3 runs last time, which tells us what? We didn't hit the balls. So all in all, across the board, we got a lot of baseball, softball going on. Like I mentioned, with Josh is coaching that as well with his daughter and sons. And across it all for the clinic-wise, you know, we're doing really well. We've got a great nucleus of individuals that love to have fun, but they also like to learn. And that's so critical for individuals in life, is to find out what they're passionate about, what they really drives their interest, and then go and learn. And if you don't stop learning, man, you ain't aging. You're not getting old, because you're constantly sharpening that mind. You're constantly learning more about yourself and about how to help others or to advance your craft. And it truly keeps you in a young at heart mentality. So I encourage everybody to keep pushing themselves. We put in training sessions every single week. We're constantly going through training with our providers. I just got out of one today where we went through shoulder mobilization, soft tissue work, cross friction massage to different tendons to the shoulder, different mobilizations to the latissimus dorsi, to the scapular muscles. We're constantly going through and learning from each other and taking information that we've just applied from a continuing education course through the International Academy of Orthopedic Medicine. We're piling that together, and not just going through information. We're actually integrating it into our practice. And so for any individual out there, please learn, go get knowledge, go find books that can help you, but don't just read the books to read the books. Don't tell me that you just want to read 100 books in a year. I want you to read one book 100 times. Take that one book, study it, pull information out of it, put it into notes, go through it often, become a master of that information, and now you're truly applying the knowledge that you're growing. So this all dovetails together with what we're talking about with insulin resistance. Because insulin resistance isn't fully understood. It's not fully understood in the sense that it's become common vernacular for society. We don't really hear people talk about how's your insulin resistance. Heck, you try and go to your physician and ask for an insulin sensitivity test, and they tell you you don't need it. So there's a lot of information that is not being fully understood of how insulin and insulin resistance truly makes the biggest impact in your secondary lifestyle diseases. So what are we talking about, secondary lifestyle diseases? We're talking about diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. We're talking about cancers. We're talking about atherosclerosis, clogging of your arteries. That cholesterol, does it even play a factor, or does it not? We're talking about fatty liver disease. Yeah, it's a secondary lifestyle disease. So the key for us is trying to figure out why. Why do we have rampant obesity or just overweight? Why do we have a lot of stomach disorders, irritable bowel syndrome, gluten sensitivities? You've got leaky gut syndrome. You've got all these different things. And what do we get in the end? We get medications. Medications to control what? Symptoms. Now again, I'm not a tin hat kind of guy. I'm not a conspiracy theory, and that's not what I'm saying now. What I'm saying is that medications are currently there to control symptoms, or not to regulate disease. We're talking about disease. We're talking about disease. We're talking about heart disease, diabetes, fatty liver disease, things that are actually going to shut down organs and kill you. Now, last podcast, I talked about the mitochondria and the role that it plays in your health. It's absolutely essential. Essentially, the mitochondria stops producing energy. The energy doesn't allow you to oxygenate your tissues, and what happens? You die. Your organs die, and they slowly die a death with each cell within that organ until eventually it cannot function anymore. The kidney as an organ can't work anymore. A liver as an organ can't work anymore. It dies from the stress that's been put on it and the disease state of each cell in that organ, mainly because the mitochondria is not working effectively. So taking that mitochondria understanding, and let's apply it to insulin resistance. So why does that matter? Because insulin is a master regulator. It is the second most dominant hormone in your body. Every cell in your body has a receptor for insulin. And there's only one other hormone that's more dominant, which I'll get into later. But there's only one hormone that's more dominant. So when your body excretes insulin, the cells listen. The cells listen. So really, what does insulin even do? Now, insulin is necessary for growth. It is a growth hormone, and you see it all the time. With insulin present, it helps tissues grow. It helps tissues grow. So if you see it in pregnant women, they produce more insulin because the baby needs to grow. But we also have insulin demonstrating growth in all of our other tissues. So insulin itself really helps take blood sugar that's in the bloodstream, so what we call blood glucose, and it allows you to use that blood glucose for energy in the cell. Now, last time we talked about the mitochondria. We talked about how the mitochondria in the cell produces ATP in the end. And the way it's able to produce ATP is it uses that glucose in a Krebs cycle to end up using the byproducts from that Krebs cycle in the electron transport chain to produce ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is your energy molecule. It's what allows you to constantly move, whether you volitionally move or it's autonomic. It's the energy necessary. And we talked about it last time about how it's necessary. So we need to be able to absorb this glucose into the cells so we can use it for energy. So insulin is released by the pancreas. It is released solely so that the body will then take glucose and put it into the cell. That's what it's used for. But the difference between insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance is mighty, mighty. So insulin resistance is when the cells themselves are telling the body that there's been too much insulin. And I equate insulin as the friend that just never be quiet. They just won't ever shut up. They're constantly talking yak, 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 yak. And you can never truly get either a word in or just a little bit of silence. You just want some silence. So what happens is you start ignoring your friend a little. They talk, 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 and you kind of zone them out, and you don't always respond quickly to their comments. You don't always get their jokes because you're not fully listening. You're resistant to their words. That's similar to what happens to your cells. See, your cells, they get overwhelmed because your body is constantly producing insulin. And in a perfect world, when your cells are insulin sensitive, when insulin's present, they open the door that lets the blood glucose in, then your blood sugar in your body, that blood glucose in your bloodstream, lowers. And pretty much if your blood sugar levels lower to under 100, usually your body stops producing insulin. So then it's a feedback loop that says, we're below 100. We don't need any more insulin produced. The body's going to take care of it. The muscles are going to reabsorb it without insulin, and we're good. So once it gets below 100, it starts shutting down insulin, and your body stops producing it, which is fine, which is good. If you eat something, carbohydrate, sugar, drink something, orange juice, and it brings your blood glucose back above 100, well, then your pancreas starts pumping out insulin solely to absorb that glucose and move it into the cell. But for individuals that are constantly eating, always snacking, having big meals, then snacking again, big meal snacking, your body never gets a chance to relax from insulin. Insulin's constantly being produced because you're constantly eating. You're constantly snacking. So eventually your cells go, gosh, insulin, you're the friend that won't be quiet. You're constantly yakking in my ear. So it's too much for me. So I'm going to tune you out. And that's where your cells start becoming less sensitive. And we call that insulin resistance. So insulin resistance is not a binary term. It's not you're insulin resistant or you're not. It's to what extent. It's on a continuum. And on one side of the continuum is insulin sensitivity. That's where we want to be at. Everything works great. On the other side of the continuum is diabetes. Diabetes. Diabetes is where your cells have completely shut down. They've completely shut down to the point where they say, we will not take any more insulin. We're not going to be responsive to it. And your pancreas has said, yes, you will. And it keeps producing more. And it keeps producing more because that blood sugar isn't coming down in your bloodstream. So it keeps producing more. And eventually what happens is your pancreas can't produce any more insulin. It's maxed because your cells are so resistant to it. So at that point, your blood sugar levels just stay elevated. And that's when you do a A1C or you do a blood glucose test, a fasting blood glucose, and you find that your numbers are too high when you're fasting, which is your indication that you're diabetic. That you're diabetic. When your blood sugar levels go down and you haven't eaten anything in 10 hours and they're still elevated, you're diabetic. So diabetes is just the end game to insulin resistance. That's all that is. But there's a real problem on how we get here. And today's purpose is to really summarize insulin resistance and how we get there. So there's multiple factors that I see has led to insulin resistance and the causes that we see, the symptoms that are a result of insulin resistance. And over the next couple podcasts, I'll start diving deeper into each of these and why. So insulin resistance, first off, it begins because we're getting a constant stimulus from the body that it has to produce insulin to bring down blood sugar. Mainly because you're constantly eating. You're constantly eating. So over time, those cells get fatigued. And as soon as they get fatigued, they start wreaking havoc on your body. So the first place that your body starts to become resistant to insulin is the liver. And the reason is because the liver is the first area where your body starts taking all of your blood glucose from that insulin, bringing it into the cell and creating long chains of blood glucose, and we call that glycogen. So glycogen is just massive, massive, massive storage of blood glucose packed together in a small vessel that we can then use later for energy. And you use glycogen, it's in your muscles right now. It's when you're working out and you're exercising. It is your longer storage mode. So even if you haven't eaten anything in hours, you can take off and go running and still have the energy to keep doing it. And you're not going to completely fatigue out because you have large storage of glycogen in your muscles. So your liver does that constantly, but the liver is the first place that says, geez, this insulin's on all the time. Gosh, it's too much. It can't tell the pancreas to stop producing insulin. All it can do is tell its cells, let's become less resistant. Let's become less responsive. So what happens is now the liver becomes insulin resistant. And when the liver becomes insulin resistant, it realizes it can't keep producing all this glycogen. So what it does is it then converts it to fat. And when it gets too much fat, it has nowhere to put it. It's been maxed out. Now it starts putting fat around the liver. And that fat builds up and builds up in the viscera, which is the abdominal cavity, and they call that fatty liver disease. Now we're getting more and more people over and over that are getting fatty liver disease, and it's non-alcoholic. It's not because they're drinking a whole bunch of alcohol all the time. It's because they're becoming insulin resistant. The impact that it's making on them from chronically elevated blood sugar levels and chronically elevated insulin levels. So then what happens? Then your body panics and your liver panics, goes, well, gosh, there's too much fat here. We can't store it all. So what does it do? It turns around and just releases it back in the blood sugar. In the bloodstream. Once it's in the bloodstream, your body now gets more circulating triglycerides. You do your blood tests and it says, gosh, you've got elevated cholesterol and you've got elevated triglycerides, which is a whole nother issue, which we'll get into next time. So from those high cholesterol levels, we're thinking that, oh, well, gosh, now you're getting closer to diabetes and you're getting high cholesterol. What else? What also starts causing high blood pressure? The cascade of events from the increases in insulin resistance causes vasoconstriction to the vessels, which increases your blood sugar. Increases your high blood pressure. And we know that high blood pressure is the silent killer that eventually leads to heart problems or heart attacks in the end. But that too is becoming more prevalent because you are insulin resistant. It is a rarity, an absolute rarity, to have diabetes and not have high blood pressure. They go hand in hand because insulin resistance causes high blood pressure. So what about inflammation? Well, inflammation, that's the silent aggressor. The different foods that we put into our body, it puts different levels of inflammation in our cells, which then changes our own response to insulin as well. That inflammation causes insulin resistance. Cortisol. We talked about before how cortisol is a major hormone. It is the major hormone, with insulin being second. So anytime cortisol is present, every cell in the body listens to it. The reason it listens to it is because it is your fight or flight hormone. It is the one that says you will survive or not. So anytime cortisol is present, the body doesn't listen to insulin anymore, because insulin is a storage hormone. It makes you store energy. Well, cortisol says, don't be storing that energy because we might need it to chase or fight. We've got to run away or we got to fight to the death. So it's constantly telling all the cells, don't store, actually release glucose. So it actually takes the stored fats and glycogen and pushes it into the bloodstream and increases your blood sugar levels. So then what does insulin have to do? It has to increase insulin as a result. So cortisol overall increases your chances of insulin resistance. So when you're constantly stressed out because of your job, you're not getting enough sleep, so that stresses out. You're fighting with your spouse. You're constantly feeling anxiety. That's creating stress, and that stress is releasing cortisol. And the cortisol is then increasing blood sugar back into the bloodstream. So what do you get? You get this constant cycle that leads to insulin resistance. The cells don't know what else to do. It's constantly getting bombarded all the time. So the cells start giving up and becoming resistant to insulin. That's its only defense mechanism, which eventually leads to diabetes. So especially for women, you've got another uphill battle, because cortisol also affects your hormones. It truly affects your hormones. Because cortisol is the precursor that is the same derivatives makes cortisol will make all of your other sex hormones, from estradiol, testosterone. So when the body wants to produce more cortisol because you're highly stressed all the time and it's running out and it can't get enough from the adrenals, it will start trying to get it in other areas. And your body can make cortisol from its ovaries, because right now your ovaries will make progesterone. And it will take DHEA, turn it into pregnenolone, which will then turn it into progesterone. But your body can rob that pregnenolone. It can rob it and make it into cortisol in high demanding needs, because your body realizes, hey, this stress we're under, hey, if we don't get it under check, if we don't fight or flight, then we don't have to worry about reproducing and having kids anyway. So you don't even need that prednisone. You don't need that progesterone. So it steals your progesterone ability. So now women get less progesterone, which means estrogen dominates, which creates a whole nother mess for women. So you could see across the board that when the system isn't in play, it leads to a lot of problems. And the main root of this is coming back to insulin resistance. So what else would cause insulin resistance? Well, one, if we're constantly eating, that will release it. But two, the types of foods we're eating. High glycemic foods that are constantly requiring the release of insulin, such as a lot of simple sugars, fructose, table sugars, candies, drinks, orange juices, lattes that have sugar syrup in them, all huge. Now I haven't even got into packaged foods. Packaged foods and the type of ingredients that are in there is going to create oxidative stress. Oxidative stress then impacts again the way that we can create energy, which drives insulin levels. So all in all, what I'm trying to get at is that insulin resistance is something that we need to chronically modify. We need to chronically evaluate. So how do you evaluate it? Well, one, we can simply look at our blood sugar levels and we can look at our insulin levels. So our blood sugar levels we can look at two different ways. We can say, what is our fasting blood glucose level? So you haven't eaten within 10 hours and you do those little finger pricks that you can get at home. You can test your blood. It should be below 87. Should be below 87. The lower the better. The second thing we can do is we can get a blood test for an A1C. And an A1C is a 3-month average of your blood glucose that is stored in your hemoglobin of your blood. So it gives you an average of what your blood sugar level is like. And that number preferably should be below 5.4 or lower. Somewhere even in below 5 is better. Because our key is a couple. We want to know at what level are we insulin resistant. Ideally, we want to be insulin sensitive. Everything works fine. We have blood sugar levels stay low. Our response to insulin is perfect. There is no resistance. On the other side is diabetes. And that's where we know we can't bring down our blood sugar levels with the insulin that's produced. So what would our blood levels tell us? Well, if you have a fasting blood glucose above 87, that tells me that there's some level of insulin resistance. If it's above 100, that's fasting, you're heading towards diabetes. So the minute that you know you have some insulin resistance, there has to be factors at play to help reduce that. So at a minimum, check your blood glucose fasting each morning and see where you're at. Are you below 87? If you are constantly below 87, then get an A1C. And this is a blood test you can get from your doctor, and then that tells you your 3-month average, and that should be below 5.4. But if both of those are still good, you know that you're not insulin resistant so far, but you still could be. Because the way that insulin and blood sugar levels work is that as your blood sugar levels increase, your body produces insulin, and then it lowers it. So then if your cells become mildly insulin resistant, and blood glucose goes up, your body reduces insulin, but they're insulin resistant mildly, so that level of insulin didn't work to bring it down, so then it produces even more insulin, and then it comes down. And this keeps going a tug and war back and forth to where now the cell goes, gosh, I just become resistant, but now there's more insulin, so I have to become more resistant. And then the pancreas goes, hey, the blood sugar levels still aren't coming down with the 2 increases I had, increase it a third time. And it keeps doing this back and forth until eventually the cells are completely resistant or the pancreas can't produce any more insulin. Either way, you start getting diabetes. So the key for us is when we do a blood test and it says that we have below 87 on our blood sugar levels, or our A1C is below 5.4, and we think, well, all life is good. I'm going to eat as much candy as I want now, drink as much Mountain Dew as I want. Because I'm normal. Well, not really. Now we need to get a fasting insulin test. Because the fasting insulin will tell us truly how insulin sensitive you are. This will tell you if it's working real well or not. So there's 3 different ways that we can assess insulin resistance, but the key is we want to overall know what is our baseline today, from our blood glucose to our A1C and then a fasting insulin. And then from that, we can start making changes. And in the next couple podcasts, we're going to start getting into how to make those changes and also why it matters. How insulin resistance changes your blood pressure. How insulin resistance changes your cholesterol levels. How insulin resistance also makes you have obesity, but also obesity makes you be insulin resistant. They both affect each other. What are some of the ways in your lifestyle you can make changes to decrease your chances of insulin resistance? How can you make that improvement today? So stay tuned. If this so far has been intriguing to you related to insulin resistance, and you've been sitting there wondering, gosh, why do I have this constant tire around my midsection? Why am I not able to lose weight? Why do I feel tired all the time? Why have I decreased my libido? Why do I have erectile dysfunction? Why do I have difficulty with fertilization? Why do I have difficulty sleeping? Why is my high blood pressure just going off the chart, and my doctors tell me, well, we don't know why it is. Must be genetic. Why do you have high cholesterol? If any of these are you, then understanding insulin resistance is the key. And stay tuned for the next couple podcasts where we dive deep into this. So thanks for your time today. I hope you got a ton of value out of that. If you do, hit the subscribe button, get the rest that are coming through. And I appreciate you more than you know. Feel free to hit a comment as well and let me know any questions you have related to insulin resistance or how this might affect you in your life. If this really, really hit home to you and you know somebody that relates, send this over to them so that they get the same value out of you did. All in all, thank you, team. I'll see you next time. Appreciate you.